There we are. Excuse me. All right. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. I get a little extra light because lighting's everything. Lighting will make you trust that you look different than you actually do. I will say that. Like half the time, I I record a lot of content that y'all never see. Just trying to kind of flush out, day in the life, lifestyle tips, mental health things, which I got a lot coming for y'all this summer, is hopefully gonna be that point where I'm at like, okay, let's push it out. Let's get going, give y'all as much as I can of my brain and my insights for people. And a lot of y'all, everything else. I am only, as a social worker, I think my biggest blessing has been the people that I've gotten to work with and the people that I get to meet and I get to talk with, because they've really held me accountable to not only if I do know something different or than them, that I can give it to them, but it's also they've been able for me to expand in how I view a perspective that helps people with mental health. And so it's like turned into like a low-key, shout out to all my former clients, my current clients, and anyone that's been in my life, whether you've been a support system or someone that's been a villain in my story, or there's not a whole lot of villains in my story. There are a couple, but people who have really challenged me to be a better person. Because today's topic, I think, all I can say is I'm only able to gauge from the conversations that I've had with people, and that is with a very diverse a population of people, I guess. So today's topic of trust and mental health. So the relationship between trust and mental health is, I think every single topic I talk about is imperative, but this one is like seriously the foundational, number one building block when you're when you're meeting with a client or when you're trying to support anyone. My intention with the going live here is not only to just have content, but to get out. Everyone has their version of being like a quote unquote therapist for other people. There is a big difference between being a friend and a therapist, and there are certain skills and techniques, but I'm trying to give y'all some of those, perspectives on how you can approach being a support system for people, because you guys do it anyway. And the chronic burnout of just being a human and an adult, not even an adult, it's kind of crept into being an adolescent and a child at this point, is because the exposure that we have to stress is one of it's at an all-time high. Our ancestors, regardless of whether or not where they came from, did not have a degree of stress that was this significant in a long time. So when we talk about the building blocks of like what it takes to be a therapist for someone, or how do you sustain in taking care of yourself while you're taking care of other people, trust is imperative. And it can look a lot of different unsuspecting ways. So I wanted to go over a couple of the different types of some of them are like points and perspectives to consider, a reframe, and where did my list go? Some of them are really just, like maybe getting back up and approaching what you have to do every day a little bit differently, because you're not going to be able to sustain managing and balancing what mental health looks like and includes growth if you are potentially operating out of this perspective of trust of other people. So let's get to the point here. I might be winging it because I never actually finished my notes yesterday. So trust, one of the most prevalent conversations that I have with my clients, other than the relationship with time and the relationship with money, and relationship with self and relationship. There's a lot. Anyways, this is a process, right? So trust. One of the first things when I start working with a person, my first and foremost, honestly, I'm kind of granted a degree of trust already. I actually consider that a privilege because I don't like to not recognize that just because I'm a therapist means that I'm automatically to be trusted. Not that I'm just, not trustworthy, but because I think there's this kind of blanket a potential, like it's almost like a facade that like because someone is almost so tired that they come to like, oh, I'm in therapy, I'm finally here, I don't have to consider anything else. That's actually one of the first things I say to my clients is I want you to interview me. I want you to understand what I'm about because I may not be the person that you really need me to be. And I'm as the therapist, I am in a position where I have to reinforce that. I have to be on the lookout for certain things that one of my clients does in their background as they start to unfold and give me more information and insight about what's happened to them in their lives, what they're all about, what's important to them, and how what I know about myself, not only personally, but then also professionally and my style, which they're not very far apart these days. Like I have boundaries, don't get me wrong. But partly why I'm bringing this up is because there's a lot of therapists, and this is going to come off as it's a critique, yep, actually, but I mean it with the most respect, is that therapists get into this industry because we're traumatized at some point. We all have trauma and we've all done some kind of work on trauma. But I know when I came into this profession that I hadn't done the extent of work that I really needed to do to be able to be a truly safe place for my clients. Not that I wasn't trustworthy, but it's because I hadn't actually really understood what I was saying from a personal experience. And I'm not saying that you can't be a good therapist without doing the work, but you can become you can reach your more of a potential and you can help your clients even more if you actually are able to balance, which is very difficult, I will say, because the system that I come from is not supportive of you doing your own healing all the time. But you have to address your own traumas or know about them enough and how they show up in your life to be able to really be effective. And so when I was thinking about like, okay, what are the main points of trust in mental health? It really starts with a therapist because I'm kind of here to advocate for y'all to do the work. And most of y'all, I would encourage you to try to do that with a therapist because it will, in essence, be more effective, and you'll have a support system naturally built into and who understands what work you do have to do. But I want everyone to understand when you are trying to find a therapist, you need to approach that as like almost like you're dating. You're not supposed to be dating your therapist, but you need to understand, where does this person come from? What is their training? What is their story and how do they tell it? And how do they use their story to be a therapist? Maisie, come here. She's trustworthy to be loud as soon as I start talking. Come here. Come here. Come here. She's got her blanket again, y'all. Let me just show y'all so you don't think I'm like that, cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. But this is what she brings me, if y'all can't see this. It is a raggedy, it's an old Christmas sweater is really what it is. Okay? And I bought this Christmas sweater for my other cat, TJ, and he absolutely hated it. But then when I got Maisie, it's like her little security blanket. There you go. So she tears it up. That have threads everywhere. It's just, but if y'all hear that, that's my cat. So back to trust, right? So when you're starting therapy, you want to approach the conversation with your therapist, if they don't approach it this way already, to understand what this therapist background is. Come here, Maisie. Come here. So one of the things that I say to my therapist, to my clients, I tell them, when I was in the office, I would give them kind of the layout of the office, show them where the bathroom is, whatever. And I was like, but I want you to understand that coming into therapy is uncomfortable. It's going to potentially be like a decision or a position you're in that you have to determine what is uncomfortable just because of what you're going through versus what is the wrong fit of your therapist. Because a lot of the discomfort that we can go through is not just our trauma, it is actually a misalignment in the relationship of who we share that trauma with. So if y'all, there's a kind of a trendy term, it's not super trendy, but it's not the most clinical term either, but of trauma bonding. You can absolutely trauma bond with your therapist. And that is something that as a therapist, they train us in school to be aware of. But we are also human, and that being aware of what we call transference or countertransference is something that we are trained to be on the lookout for, but is not always something that we actually adhere to. Y'all, I apologize. The audio is going to be. Close the door. So, the first point about trust is that if you're going to be in therapy, figure out what your understanding of your therapist is. And I do appreciate kind of this automatic, rapport and trust that I do get because I work hard to be trustworthy and be ethical and respect confidentiality and be respectful to other people's situations and where they're at. But I've been mismatched with some clients before, and it was detrimental for me because I was just taking clients because, I had open spots and I really wasn't considering whether or not I was the right fit for that client. Because my drive and the modality in which, whether it's the therapies that I use or my personality and how I deliver information is not always for everyone. A lot of that has to do with my upbringing in New England in the northern area, is I'm just kind of more straight to the point. And sometimes people need more time to really soak in information. And I can break trust because it can come off harsh sometimes. Now, that's something that I get to choose whether or not I want to adapt to. But when it comes to trust and mental health, that relationship and that rapport with who it is that you're sharing with is essential. So for someone who's not a therapist, this is something you have to be really mindful about, because being a friend or a family member to someone who really needs to process or who's struggling or who's trying to get on their recovery journey to recovery, you may not be the best person. Just because they trust you does not mean that you're the best person to be the support system for them. And a lot of it is because you have more than one role. Especially this happens a lot with parents, and it's hard. I respect that because I'm not a parent, to at least to a human child, that being a parent, it hurts immensely to not have your child just want to share with you, that to not just trust that. But because you are holding on to the role, and you have to have a role of being a parent and being a guide for them in their life, or a disciplinarian, you already have multiple roles as a parent for your child. Being a therapist too, it's probably one of the greater, what I would dub as a mistake that parents make, is taking on the belief system that they can be everything for their child. This is where I'm pretty sure it's an African proverb, is that raising a child takes a community. And therapists are part of that community. That's why we exist. It's not because there's something wrong. There could be something wrong, not with you, like you're not a horrible person, but there literally could be something off, could be a hormonal balance that you're not necessarily, you even may be a doctor that's trained in that. But if you were trained in a specific specialty, you may be limited in being able to really see the presentation of what's going on because you're too close. You're too close to the relationship, right? So when we talk about trust, that's a really big I think I was like where I wanted to start foundationally, for someone who is a support system for someone, just respect that you may know what to do. You may be really good at giving advice, but you may not be the best person to provide that insight for that person. And there are a lot of power dynamics, especially with parents and children, that get in the mix of that. Plus, then there's emotions that you have to be aware of that, I'm trained, but it doesn't mean that I'm very 100% accurate with. But like if a client can evoke emotion for me, and I have to be very careful of how that now filters into the messages that I send to that patient, how I help them process in the direction in which I take them. So that's my first thing about mental health and trust, is that being aware of not being overconfident that you are trustworthy, so therefore you're the best person, and also not assuming that someone should just automatically trust you, because that is almost sometimes an indicator of trauma, and it can instill trauma bonding, and then you get yourself into this weird the drama triangle and the power dynamics, even in a professional relationship, that you don't even really know, and it's kind of difficult to get out of. So the next point I wanted to talk about is what is trust? Now, I don't really want to, I'm going to actually challenge y'all to consider, how would you define trust, and how would you describe how it manifests in your life? What are the most, whether it's trust relationships that you have with people, or what does it really mean? Because take a moment to marinate on that for a second. Because what I usually end up talking with people about is something that some people don't expect. I, as a therapist, encourage people to consider trust only manifests within ourselves. We don't and inherently cannot trust other people more than we have to trust ourselves. And if we do trust other people more than we trust ourselves, which I'll talk about what trust is with ourselves and what that looks like, then it is a facade. It is a delusion. This is such a common misconception about trust, because the way we are built in our human network is that we only externalize trust. We only think that it's possible, not everyone, just keep in mind I am generalizing a lot of this, but that a lot of trust is seen only to be able to happen between two people. And instead of looking at it like, that sharing of, you have to do certain things to build trust, trust must first and foremost be instilled in the individual before it can be extended to other people. And so trust, how you build trust with yourself, we'll talk a little bit about, but it's usually just kind of the opposite of what's broken trust with yourself. How do you not have trust within yourself to do things? Trauma is usually the first thing that is a culprit, because having something taken from you, usually by someone that you have extended trust to, is or being hurt. So a lot of this manifests from childhood. Yes, the stereotyping cliche is actually true, but not all therapy is just about talking about your mother, I promise, or your father. A lot of it is, but it's more talking about the messages and the lessons and the rules and the principles that were given to you by your parents, and you reestablishing a new trust within yourself and keeping what works for you and disposing of what doesn't. So the first disillusion of trust that we have is that we've never actually gone through and worked through some of the things like, hey, is this actually serving me? Is this lesson about how you make your bed every morning? Is that something that is actually serving you? And because if it's causing you stress, we have to figure out whether or not that stress is actually coming from that particular message, or is it coming from having an unaddressed stress response that attaches itself to the pressure of what your parents' expectation to make your bed every morning was? Does that make sense? I see this quite a bit with, you'd be surprised with people's standard of cleanliness. Um, you see a lot of obsessive compulsive disorders develop out of this because OCD can be manifested out of cleaning. It's a healthy coping skill, but anything healthy can become unhealthy real quick if it is too depended upon. So you see a lot of people who have like a very high standard of cleanliness, and that is how they essentially feel in control when they've become misaligned and having a misaligned trust within self to be able to self-soothe. Sorry, I got distracted real quick. Where did my chat go? Oh, here we go. So, trust with self. How it is broken, it's usually already broken. Not every it's not broken completely. I think I kind of see it as a piece of elastic that over time, like we're all born with a flexibility to be able to endure stress. And over time, the more that you pull that elastic, and its bounce back is really great, but over the years of wear and tear, if you don't take care of the environment that it's in, have you guys ever came across one of those elastics that was like sticky and gooey? Like, and it was just like, oh, where has this been? And it's like been in a drawer and it's been humid and it's just been like kind of festering. Yeah. Get graphic with it, because that is really the only way that you're going to be able to like hook onto this concept of trust and really rebuild a trust within yourself, so then your relationships in turn don't get affected and you don't end up isolating yourself and making things worse. Because when you're reestablishing trust with yourself, you do need to actually be part of and engage with other people to test out how you trust yourself. I'll get to that point though in a second. So when we're talking, so the influence of trauma is really the biggest one. The impact of long-term stress, procrastination is one of the main culprits of breaking trust with self. Now, if I had people here, I'd ask like, well, why? Why? Can you take a guess? It's the little things. It's the little things that you hold on to when you feel too stressed to finish washing the dishes and you leave the dishes in there. And then if by some chance, this is, you'd be surprised at how common this is. And there's not even bugs have to be present, but if by some chance you saw a bug and you associated with that one dish, like that one bug, and you left it in there, you start to blame yourself. You start to pretty much bring all that humidity into that elastic band. And then you create more of an unproductive environment internally for you to actually be motivated to go and be consistent with making sure that when you put a dish in the sink, that you can actually complete the task and put it in the dishwasher. Long-term exposure to stress and lack of stress management is what feeds procrastination in one sense. Having poor insight about your relationship with self and your relationship with food, because over the course of that time, what you're putting into your body, if it's not helpful or respectful to you thriving, then you're not actually doing something trustworthy for you. You're not able to connect and be mindful, like, you know what, I had an intention to feed myself, so therefore I did this. And so this is where I don't care what you feed yourself. It does matter. I will say you cannot eat Taco Bell every single day and still have a trust with yourself. But if you are really hungry and you only have like a certain amount of time or money to be able to eat something, then you feeding yourself with intention at Taco Bell will reestablish trust. It's you showing up for the natural biological cues that your body is showing you. And this becomes what you need to parent. You have to reparent yourself in terms of addressing your needs. So whenever you do not bring yourself food, shelter, water, safety, those are your basic needs in terms of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There's another level to it, but we'll go into the Maslow hierarchy of needs another time. That's more in the group work that I do, because on a live where people are just like asking questions or engaging, I can talk a little bit about it, but it really requires a more in-depth processing about that. But if you do not address your basic needs, then and you start to accumulate in a backlog of basic needs, and then you also don't have any ability to manage your emotions, and you don't know how to use that energy to manage your emotional budget for the day, then you start to go into a backlog. And when you don't address yourself, when you do not start and you do not tell yourself the truth, you are actively breaking trust with yourself for not showing up for you. So this is where procrastination, I don't know, is that a surprise to hear for anyone? That if you struggle with procrastination, it's not an issue that you have of like there's something wrong with you. It's a trust issue. It's a trust issue within yourself that you are going to be able to complete things to your standard, even with a distraction. That's the thing, is like the distraction is over time what happens, it's caused by long-term exposure to stress and trauma. The what and the why, you know, that's where you kind of have to reflect and understand. But I see a lot of people get stuck at understanding like, okay, this is what happened to me. This is what's wrong with me. And we don't really get into this position of, okay, what do we do about that now? And so when I tell y'all, hey, I'm Sarah, I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a clinical addiction specialist, what do? I don't just sit here and tell people what to do. I really can't. I don't give advice. I am one of those people. I do a lot of things, and I know a little about a lot, because a lot of people's needs, they're very similar, but they're very diverse in how they've come to not have enough information about how to attend to their needs. And so I'm that activator. I'm that person that helps kind of reorganize the shit that you can't see and put it back in a place, in a position, just like you would hire a professional organizer if you were moving, or if you have a hoarding problem, you need help. You cannot treat yourself for a hoarding problem by yourself. And you can clean up the whole house, but if you don't fix what's inside, the hoarding problem will continue elsewhere. And so a lot of people don't really understand what I do. They just think that I sit here and I do psychoanalyze people. That is an gathering and understanding. But I work more with people in the behavior modification and behavior activation in rebuilding a trust within themselves to attend to their own needs. So that is where a lot of people, so we were talking about how procrastination is one of the biggest, it breaks trust with self first and foremost. So therefore, if you do not trust that you can attend to your needs, most people don't know what their needs are, and then you cannot communicate your needs to other people, you're not going to see people as being trustworthy. You're not going to see, because they will not know that that's what you needed. They will not know whether or not they have an accurate insight on how they can be a support and be a trusting support system for you. Oh man, I just lost my other train of thought. Procrastination was, what did I say? I see a lot of people. So another issue with breaking trust with themselves is the way they speak to themselves. We all know what it sounds like when we are disrespected, when someone speaks to us in a way that breaks us. Okay. But we hold other people more accountable and rush them off than holding ourselves more accountable to the way that we speak to ourselves. So what happens over time is, because you've not had either a healthy relationship, and a lot of times as a therapist, I am usually one of the healthiest relationships that people will ever have in their lives, because they've already gotten themselves into these systems. They're a part of a family system, or they're married with kids, and you can't break that cycle and that system right then and there just because someone wants to get better. It has to happen over time. And you have to make small changes in reestablishing the trust for yourself and manage everything that you have already. It's a tough job. And there's some people, it's tougher than others, but it's not impossible. I don't believe anything's impossible. If I can do this work while managing and helping other people and get these results, then you guys can do it as well. And you have to do some of it on your own, and you have to do some of it with other people. And so when we look at getting stuck. And so we talked about procrastination it is a form of stuck, but it's moving into stuck and how you reinforce that stuckness. Okay. How you speak to yourself is probably one of the next biggest thing about what breaks trust with yourself, because you cannot extend past that point. And it is blame and shame. Blame and shame. They're quite like, they're hand holding cousins. They go, if you are shaming yourself for the reality that you live in, then you are blaming yourself versus taking responsibility. You cannot move forward with an influence of blame and shame, but a certain amount. It's effective to get maybe started, but long term, one of the things that in the lessons that I talk about in my groups is that the use of blame and shame is, metaphor time. It is like the 87 to the diesel gas. Okay. Diesel, although it's, only can go in certain things, it's a more sustainable gasoline than 87 unleaded is. And 80, I don't know if you've ever even tried just 89 or 93, but when you buy higher quality gas, it lasts longer. I didn't even know that until my friend challenged me to do it. And I was like, but I have to pay more. And I'm like, yeah, but it's processed differently. And I learned from my brother that diesel is also, speak of the devil, the person who challenged me to try changing gases, which I do. I still fill my car with 87, but I did try it, is that it did last longer and it costs not that much more, but it was the illusion of doing something different. And also I had still some internalized shame and blame of like, well, I can't really, and it became down to my relationship with money, is that I became unwilling to spend more money for higher quality things because I wasn't used to them and I was just told a certain way. And I had a shame cycle reinforcing spending more money than that was necessary. Okay. So sorry, a little tangent, but it is shame and blame are like the, sorry, I have a lighter that probably looks a little weird, but it's because I had my Palo Santo here. I'm going to take a short break in a second and tell y'all what this is. But shame and blame are not sustainable methods of accountability for yourself. Being critical on yourself is probably the biggest indicator of a mental illness that needs to be addressed. And an illness can be cured. Remember that. Just because something's going on up here does not mean that it's going to stay that way. And it can be addressed. But a diagnosis is an indication of like, hey, this is where you are right now. This is where you need to get to be. And blame and shame, if those two things are in the mix, the trust with yourself to be able to do anything different is not going to be there. And then as a therapist, you can't extend that trust to the relationship that I'm present for and holding space for and working to build rapport with, to be able to do anything different. So that's where, if you're going to therapy and you're not really seeing progress, going back to my first point of the importance of making sure you choose your therapist and interview them and treat them like they are a brand new person, and not just attach and trust them because they're a therapist, will start to challenge you to build trust within yourself and that discernment of who you pick in your life to help guide you. Also, kind of to add to kind of point one, is that a trust within a therapist may not be for the rest of your life. First of all, you should not be in therapy for the rest of your life. Let's say that again. If you are in therapy for the rest of your life, something's not working. Someone scammed you. They did not help you get better enough to see that the block and the barrier is probably within you because you didn't trust yourself to do anything different. But if you are in therapy for the rest of your life, if you've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and you still have to be in therapy every single week to manage something, you need a new therapist. You do. They're not the right fit. They may feel comfortable, and that's the problem. If they feel comfortable, if they allow you to stay stuck for too long, then they are stuck. They are not doing anything different. They may be going to continuing educations. They may be keeping their license alive, but they have a life experience that is keeping them stuck, and it can't bring enough energy to the session to help you be alleviated from your symptoms. That's what, like, why would you go to a doctor if you had cancer and you went to a doctor to be cured from cancer and you just couldn't be cured from cancer? Why would you stay with that doctor? You would go get a second opinion. You would fight for your life if it were cancer. But because it's depression, you just think you have to live with that for the rest? No. Anxiety, you will have components of anxiety that you will live with for the rest of your life. And depression may be something that fluctuates throughout your life. But if you have one long-term period of depression, something's got to give. They may not be the right therapist. You're not telling your therapist the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And you're not, you have a blockage from inside that the therapist is not identifying. Maybe it's because you're not talking about it. I don't know. This is kind of a hypothetical situation right now, but something's not working. And that's where I'm like, let's take a look at that. Because if it were any other disease, you would be going to a treatment and want to see results. The same thing applies with therapy. And if you do not see results, you are not able to build trust, not only with your therapist, but you're not able to build trust in yourself that you can actually invest your time, invest your energy in getting better and see results. So I think in other lives, I've said the term self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is the understanding of one's ability and the belief in one's ability to accomplish and do things. So if your trust with self cannot be established, you cannot build self-efficacy. EFFICACY, I believe. If you do not have self-efficacy, goal-orientedness, first of all, being goal-oriented is not a personality trait that everyone's born with. I wasn't necessarily goal-oriented we're built into a system that holds goals in our line of sight to help influence us being goal-oriented. But you don't just become goal-oriented by nature. You're exposed to something that teaches you how to be goal-oriented. And so once you start accomplishing those goals, and they don't have to be big goals, they don't have to be saving $10,000, they don't have to be changing your life. The goal that I started with was each day I will show up for one thing that aligns me with my health, that attends to my mental health. So this is why I talk so much about my sleep challenge, is because my sleep hygiene routine, my sleep hygiene routine was that one thing that I did every single day until I felt that I could do something more. And that was one thing that I did every single day already without intention, but now I just did it with intention, and I established trust in myself, and I established consistency from a very small place. I set a goal. It is a goal. It's going to be another tangent, but we're going into what's keeping you from trusting yourself that you can go to bed every night. That's another story. But then there's comparison. That's another story too. But, all of these things is what we take a look at, and is what goes into how you improve your mental health. Okay. So we've been over the first thing that we're talking about. If you're going to therapy, trusting your therapist undeniably is, don't do that. Interview your therapist, talk with them, take the free consultation. If a therapist doesn't do a free consultation, I'd be interested to understand why. But have a 10-15 minute conversation with the therapist and get your feeling. Be like, oh, okay, be distrustful intentionally. Be skeptical. Be like, all right, I saw you on Psychology Today. I read your profile. Tell me more about yourself. Listen to their tone of voice. How do you react to their tone of voice? How does it make you feel? Does it make you feel comfortable? Because if it doesn't make you feel comfortable, then you probably don't want to enter into it. Because if you're already uncomfortable, then you're going to be uncomfortable in a place of like in an unhealthy situation. Now, if it makes you feel so comfortable, like, oh, it reminds me of like my grandma who just wants to make me feel better, it's too comfortable. Okay. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't get anywhere, but I would encourage y'all to remember that long term, you're going to need to switch up your therapist game, because you're going to endure something else in life that therapist won't be able to challenge you with, because more than likely they're just at a point in their professional journey that they may not be able to challenge you to be able to get through. Okay. So I also could be wrong, but I do have a little sense of confidence that I'm not, because I see it all the time. I see people stay with, I have clients whose their issues, that is like with codependency, with depression, and overcoming that relationship with self and reestablishing their trust with self, is directly correlated to their parents having the same therapist for their whole lives, never getting any perspective of like, maybe I should try a different modality of therapy. Not just the person. What is the person trained? I have other colleagues who are trained differently than I am. And I love that, because they teach me things that I can kind of dabble in. I'm not ever going to claim to be a specialist in like EMDR, but I can use different perspectives of what I learned from a colleague of mine to help with a coping skill of things I am trained in on CBT and DBT and ACT. It's a lot of acronyms, but acceptance and commitment therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, and dialectical behavioral therapy. So when we step out and we interview no more than 3, whenever I give someone a recommendation for therapy who's either new to therapy, who has asked me for just my insight, I give them 3 choices at first, and I pick 2 people that I think I'm like, I just have this ability to kind of discern and be like, okay, I know this about them, and I know this about the therapist that I've never met before, but I'm like, these people, and then I give them someone completely different. And more times than not, the person goes with someone that's completely different from them, that even sometimes they said they wanted, because the person that they didn't want, they just didn't vibe with. So when you're talking about trust and mental health, choosing your therapist is imperative. I'm not for everyone, and everyone's not for me, because that's what I had to learn in the first part of my career doing this whole change, was that when I signed up to help people, I don't sign up to hurt people, but I also respect that can come as part of the situation. It's never my intention, but sometimes that's the impact. Why? Because it was a misplaced fit. I wasn't trusting myself. I was just taking on clients. Now, thankfully, the majority of my clients, they bonded well with me. And we're able to understand like, hey, I'm going to challenge you. This is my style. But at first, there were a handful of people that I was just like, yeah, I'll accept it. And I wasn't really I wasn't taking a critique to like, what is this patient? How is this patient good for me? How is this client going to help me grow? And I wasn't interviewing the client. I was just like, yeah, I got a space open. Here we go. So now, thankfully, I actually did just open up a couple of new spots for long term. I have some insurance spots, and then I also have private pay spots. So I have an interview process and a consultation and a series of questions that I asked you guys, because it's important to me to get you guys to a place in life that you want to be. And if I'm not well fit with my client, then I'm not going to be able to accomplish that. And I'm going to do more damage in the long run. And I don't want to do that. I didn't sign up to hurt people. I signed up to help people. Okay. So the second part of trust is trust with self. What are the biggest breaking points of trust with self? Procrastination and self-talk, negative self-talk, shame and blame specifically. If you are procrastinating on things, you are just likely shaming and blaming yourself to no end, because it is one of the most frustrating things to deal with. Just to know that you have to accomplish something and not show up and be able to accomplish it, that I struggle with procrastination sometimes. And I literally, as much as I've worked on my shame and my blame game of taking the antidote to blame is taking responsibility and accountability for what you can control or what's in your control. And the antidote to procrastination is being compassionate with yourself and becoming flexible and learning skills to reinforce your relationship with time. So you're not really able to do any of that if you are shaming and blaming yourself because you're so distracted on your inner critical parent voice and just being like, oh, see, you're not worth shit. Da, 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 da. You know that voice is talking to you with a frown, like with a burrow in their eyebrow. That's what this face, the tone that you talk with yourself looks like. How is that helpful? How is that adding value to your life? How is that getting you anywhere to not only to completion, but to feeling good about yourself and showing up to and you building trust with yourself that you can attend to your own needs. So trust is imperative. It really is. And it's not just something if you're someone who's struggled with being a part of like a narcissistic, or you've been in a domestic violence situation, or you have a history of trauma or just abusive or not just toxic relationships, anyone, honestly. But if you've been in an overt, very noticeable, like families that struggle with alcoholism and addiction, it's a huge codependent dynamic, then you likely have less trust with yourself because you're in defense mode versus protection mode. And those are two different things, because when you're in defense mode, it's about keeping people out at all costs. And the problem with that is that you can't actually move on building trust with yourself. If you're keeping everyone out, you're also keeping yourself in. So when you're in protected mode, you're out further. You actually move the wall out. It's not a wall, but we're going to say it this time. You're going to move that barrier out for keeping people out. I almost kind of see this as like a waiting room. And you're able to let people in. You're able to make the mistakes to learn, like, you know what? I needed to protect myself in this way. Now I know. Now I know that when this person comes in, I know that if they make me feel a certain way, because I've learned my stress responses, I've learned how to emotionally regulate, not emotionally control myself or stop emotion. Very different. You're able to experience the emotion because that's your alarm system. It's telling you something. You can calm it down and actually see and be able to observe how a person's moving. Then you can reestablish trust with yourself, and then also build trusting, healthy relationships. Because in that, like, I'll be honest with you in this. I'm able to do this with certain people, but there were old people in my life where I was so used to being in a certain role in my own life when it came to my relationship with them that I didn't even see that I was actually defending myself. And I was in protection mode because I was so used to their relationships and how they went and how I showed up in certain ways that thankfully at some point, though, I started showing up differently. And the relationships changed and they ended up breaking because I wasn't the same version of myself anymore. I was showing up to address my needs and to show up for my needs. And that person, or that sometimes it's a whole family, they aren't used to you doing that. So it's going to have an impact. Now, this is a lot of uncomfortable for a lot of people, but it's going to happen whether you like it or not. Cutting someone off is not the answer, because over time, what will happen is that if you just show up in the modeling of how you address your own needs, you become more intentionally selfish about putting yourself first in most situations because you've been not putting yourself first in other situations, that those relationships will naturally start to repair themselves. You will start to change the role that you once served. This is a family systems theory, by the way. So you will start to change the role that you had within that system because you've provided some separation and some protection of self versus being defensive and being like, get out, F you, you're cut off, you're done. And you will be able to actually learn how that person has changed too, and how you've changed. And that's how you reestablish trust with yourself and you improve your mental health. I have been talking for way too long, so I hope anyone who gets through that, you guys find some benefit in it. And if you can take some notes, provide some feedback. But those things, there's a lot of different quote unquote problems that we have in our lives, and how you rebuild your trust with yourself and to improve your mental health is showing up for those problems, breaking them down, knowing how to discern which problem you should attend to first. Because sometimes the most obvious problem is not the one that you should address first. And because I was thinking about, okay, like we talked about procrastination and shame and blame, that negative self-talk. Procrastination is something that it's a long-term symptom. Honestly, I don't start with being like just throwing skills at people, because you doing the patterns that got you to procrastinate is influenced by shame and blame. It's usually negative self-talk and a lack of self-compassion, and addressing the thought distortions that allow the avoidance pattern to actually click over into a different track for you to get distracted and not come back to it. And then just the burden of having too much stress and racing thoughts. So you have to address some of the underlying issues before you actually see procrastination decrease. So a lot of people, I tell my clients, I'm like, you're going to have to give this time, because you did not start procrastinating yesterday. It is a long-term chronic problem that has built its way up for probably a solid 10 years, depending on how old you are. Even if it started, it didn't start. It started in childhood. Most kids don't want to do the things that they need to do, but parents, you are prepared to make sure that kids do those things. And that's good. But you can also, if you're depositing more stress on the situation, then you're also kind of feeding in your own procrastination cycle, and in turn creating one for your child too. So, yeah, that's partly why I built the program the way I did, is because all of these components require reflection, and then in turn they require application. So once you're able to start taking a look, okay, if I struggle with procrastination, making sure that you have just those 5 minutes, and my sleep hygiene routine is out there for y'all for free. It's on my website. But you can go and you can actually start making that reflection and building trust with yourself to attend to your needs, all in like a 5 to 10 minute period right before you go to sleep. It is probably the most effective place to do it. Stress management it's kind of like it propels itself at night, because if you go from a conscious state of mind to a subconscious state of mind, and you're in a stressful state in your conscious mind, you bring stress into your subconscious, and then you wake back up with stress. Why? In the form of dreams and nightmares. Y'all ever woken up from a bad dream and it just messed your mood up from that day? Yeah. So when you can cut off that stress response into the subconscious, you actually regain more quality sleep, and in turn you have less stress the next day. What I call compound interest in terms of your emotional energy. It will accumulate over time. You'll see that brain fog go down. You'll see inflammation in your body go down. So your perception of pains may start to change. And you just start to see like a decrease in symptoms over time. But that's just one change. There's a multitude of changes of how you increase your trust within yourself and how your mental health improves. So, oh boy, that was a pretty long, I think that, yeah, that's lecture worthy. If you guys have any questions, please go, let me go back to this chat and see. Okay, no one's there. No one said anything there. But if any questions, just kind of out the gate, because now I'm like done with like lecture mode of trust and mental health. I'm so excited because this is great. So my mom, this is one of my favorite books. I'm listening to it, but I've read it about 4 or 5 times, and I can't find my copy. And my mom bought me a new copy, and I'm super excited to go back through it. If you ever get, hold on, I'm sorry. The Road Less Traveled by Scott Peck. If you guys ever get a chance to read this book, this was the catalyst to my, me making that decision to change. I wouldn't say it's like what aligned me with transformation, but what I'm going over, if you guys check out my YouTube at some point, and all of the lives are there. I'm going to be having them in podcast form soon, so you can listen over time. That these topics that I'm going through every week are the components to which all the topics that are consistent that I bring up with all my clients in therapy, that helps people kind of recorrect and redirect what it is that they need their life to be. And then that way they can get on a road to recovery, which is a road less traveled. Okay. So I hope you guys have a good rest of your Friday. You stay cool out there because in North Carolina, it is freaking hot. And yeah, have a blessed, productive, stress-less weekend. Have a good one.